You know that feeling when you're the only thing standing between your company and a total disaster, but to your boss, you're completely invisible? For 6 years, that was my life at Vanguard Pharma. I wasn't in sales, so I wasn't a rock star. I was just the person who quietly prevented federal lawsuits while everyone else slept. I walked into that boardroom with a 200-page report proving I'd saved them millions. I asked for a 10% raise. My CEO didn't just say no, he laughed in my face. He thought he was putting a quiet employee in her place. He didn't realize he was effectively firing the only person who knew how to keep his company out of prison. Before I tell you how my resignation triggered a federal raid that brought down his entire empire, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever been punished for doing your job too well, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to see how this ends. My name is Marin, and for the better part of a decade, I existed as a ghost within the glass and steel walls of Vanguard Pharma. In a corporate culture obsessed with quarterly sales figures and flashy marketing campaigns, I was the silent friction that kept the entire structure from sliding into chaos. My official title was Director of Regulatory Affairs, a designation that sounded dry and bureaucratic to the untrained ear. But in practice, I was the fail-safe mechanism for a multi-billion-dollar operation. I am 38 years old, born and raised in a family of engineers, and I have always operated with a logic that is as cold and unyielding as the federal regulations I enforce. I don't believe in luck. I believe in data protocols, audit trails, and the absolute certainty of compliance. My office was located on the 12th floor, tucked away behind the humid hum of the server rooms, far removed from the plush carpets of the executive suites on the 40th level. To the sales team, I was an obstacle the Department of No. To the executive board, I was merely a line item on a spreadsheet, a cost center that generated zero visible revenue but consumed a steady stream of budget. They didn't understand that the reason they hadn't faced a federal lawsuit in 6 years wasn't because they were fortunate. It was because I was doing my job. That morning, the atmosphere in the headquarters felt oppressive. The air conditioning system was humming with a low, aggressive vibration that seemed to rattle the very bones of the building. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the main conference room, looking out at the sprawling city below, but my mind was entirely focused on the heavy black binder resting on the mahogany table behind me. Inside were 200 pages of undeniable proof. I had spent the last 3 weekends compiling every single data point, every intercepted error, and every potential disaster I had averted over the last 19 quarters. The executive summary alone told a staggering story. $40 million saved in potential FDA fines, legal settlements, and product recalls. $40 million that remained in the company's bank account solely because of the automated validation systems I had built. I adjusted the cuff of my blazer, checked my watch, and took a slow, steadying breath. I wasn't asking for a miracle. I was asking for a 10% raise, a market correction for myself and my team of 5 analysts who were currently being paid significantly below the industry standard. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Prescott walked in first. He was our new chief executive officer, a man brought in 6 months ago by the private equity firm that now owned us. Prescott didn't come from a pharmaceutical background. He came from high-frequency trading. He walked with the aggressive, forward-leaning gait of someone who viewed every human interaction as a transaction he needed to win. He was wearing a bespoke gray suit that probably cost more than my annual mortgage payments, and he carried nothing, no notebook, no laptop, just a smartphone that he was already tapping on. Trailing behind him was Corinne, the vice president of sales. If Prescott was the hammer, Corinne was the scalpel. She was sharp, ambitious, and viewed my department with open disdain. To her, regulatory compliance was just red tape designed to strangle her sales targets. She offered me a tight, synthetic smile that didn't reach her eyes as she took the seat to Prescott's right. "Let's make this quick, Marin," Prescott said, not even looking up from his phone as he sat at the head of the table. "I have a lunch with the investors in 30 minutes. What is this regarding?" I remained standing. I preferred the leverage of height, even if it was minimal. "Good morning, Prescott." "Corinne. Thank you for the time." I placed my hand on the binder. "I've prepared a comprehensive review of the Regulatory Affairs Department's performance over the last fiscal year. As you know, the industry average for compliance violations is roughly 3%. Vanguard Pharma is currently operating at 0.01%. I paused, waiting for a reaction. There was none. Prescott swiped a notification away on his screen. I continued, keeping my voice steady, projecting the confidence I had rehearsed. This efficiency isn't accidental. It is the result of the risk detection protocols I implemented. Specifically, the custom software I developed to cross-reference our shipping manifests with real-time FDA alerts. Because of this, we have avoided 14 major recalls this year. Based on the average cost of a recall, that is a savings of $40 million. I slid the binder across the polished table toward him. In light of this value, and considering my team hasn't seen a salary adjustment in 3 years despite a doubled workload, I am formally requesting a 10% increase in our departmental operating budget and a 10% salary adjustment for myself and my staff. The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector fan. Prescott finally stopped typing. He set his phone down, face up, and looked at the binder as if it were a piece of trash someone had left on his table. He didn't open it. He didn't even touch it. He just looked at it, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. He leaned back in his leather chair, interlaced his fingers, and let out a sound, a short, dry chuckle that echoed off the glass walls. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of disbelief. He turned his head slightly toward Corinne. 10%, he repeated, as if tasting the absurdity of the number. She wants 10%. Corinne smirked, tapping her manicured fingernails against the wood. Marin, she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone one uses with a slow child. I think you're confused about how business works. Your department is a cost center. You don't bring in money. You spend it. You're like janitorial services. Essential, sure, for hygiene, but we don't give the janitors a bonus just because the floors are clean. My jaw tightened. Comparing regulatory compliance to janitorial work is a dangerous oversimplification, Corinne. If the floors are dirty, people are annoyed. If our compliance fails, people die, and the company gets shut down. Prescott held up a hand to silence me. His expression had shifted from amusement to cold irritation. Enough. Here is the reality, Marin. I have been reviewing the operational efficiency of this entire organization, and frankly, I don't see the complexity you claim exists. We sell pills. We ship them. It's logistics, not rocket science. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with predatory focus. There will be no raise. There will be no budget increase. In fact, you have saved me the trouble of scheduling a meeting with you later this week. He picked up his phone again. I have decided to outsource the entire regulatory compliance function to a firm in Mumbai. They can do what you do for 30 cents on the dollar. You have 2 weeks to transition your responsibilities. The air left my lungs, but I forced myself to stand rigid. You're firing the entire team? Restructuring, he corrected effortlessly. And Marin, part of your severance package is contingent on a smooth handover. I expect you to transfer the source code, the administrative keys, and the full documentation for that system you mentioned, the Sentinel. Is it? Make sure the external team has full access by Friday. He waved a hand dismissively, already looking back at his email. Consider yourself lucky. I'm giving you 2 weeks. Most people in your position would be escorted out by security immediately. I stood there for a moment, processing the magnitude of his arrogance. He wasn't just firing me, he was dismissing the very architecture that kept his company safe. He saw the Sentinel as a company asset, a piece of software that belonged to him simply because it ran on his computers. He had absolutely no idea what he had just done. A strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was the icy, crystal-clear realization of a chess player who watches their opponent make a fatal move early in the game. I reached out and pulled the binder back toward me. I understand, I said. My voice was so calm it seemed to surprise Corinne, who was watching me closely, waiting for tears or a plea. I will begin the transition immediately. Good, Prescott said, not looking up. Close the door on your way out. I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, it was beating slower than usual. Prescott and Corinne thought they held all the cards. They thought they could discard me and keep the safety net I had built. But they had made a critical error in their due diligence. They had never read my original employment contract, and more importantly, they had never read the intellectual property waiver signed by the previous CEO 4 years ago. When I built the Sentinel, I didn't do it on company time. I didn't use company servers to write the core code. I wrote it at night, on my personal laptop, in my living room. When I brought it to the previous leadership, I offered to sell them the license. They had refused, calling it an amateur tool and insisting they didn't want to pay for software maintenance. So, I had demanded a waiver. A legal document stating that the Sentinel was my personal intellectual property, utilized by Vanguard Pharma on a loan basis, revocable at any time upon the termination of my employment. Prescott hadn't fired an employee. He had just canceled his subscription to the only thing keeping his company legal. I returned to my office on the 12th floor. The fluorescent lights hummed with that familiar, headache-inducing frequency. My team was working quietly in their cubicles, unaware that their livelihoods had just been erased by a man who had never even learned their names. I felt a pang of guilt for them, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't save them today. I had to save myself first. I sat down at my desk and woke up my terminal. The dual monitors flickered to life, displaying the dashboard of the Sentinel. It was a thing of beauty, a dark mode interface with live data streams cascading down the screen like a digital waterfall. Green indicators showed healthy shipments, yellow warned of potential documentation errors, red signaled a stop order. Currently, everything was green. The system was automatically holding 3 shipments of insulin because the refrigerated trucks hadn't uploaded their temperature logs yet. Without my software, those shipments would have gone out blindly. I opened the command terminal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed in the termination command for the background process. Kill process. Sentinel. XE. I hit enter. On the screens, the beautiful dashboard froze for a second. Then, it pixelated and vanished. The monitors flashed black, then rebooted into the default company interface, a blinking green cursor on a stark black background. This was the legacy system Vanguard had used 10 years ago, a manual command line interface that required users to type in complex codes for every single query. It was archaic, slow, and completely unforgiving of human error. I reached behind the tower of my workstation and located the encrypted external drive that housed the neural engine of the software. I unplugged it, wrapped the cable neatly around it, and placed it in my purse. Then, I began to pack. I didn't take much. A framed photo of my parents, a ceramic mug, and the fireproof envelope from the bottom of my locked file cabinet containing the original, wet ink, signed copy of the IP waiver. It took me less than 20 minutes to erase 6 years of physical presence. I walked out into the bullpen. The analysts looked up, confused by the box in my hands. I couldn't tell them the truth yet. NDA rules were strict, but I caught the eye of Silas, the warehouse manager who had come up to the 12th floor to drop off some paperwork. Silas was 50 years old, a man with rough hands and a worried brow. He knew better than anyone how fragile the supply chain really was. "Going somewhere, Marin?" he asked, his voice low. "Taking a long lunch, Silas?" I lied, though my eyes told him a different story. "Do me a favor. Double-check the cardiac meds in Bay 4 manually today." He frowned, sensing the gravity in my tone. "Why? Is the system down?" "Just check them, Silas," I said. "Take care of yourself." I walked toward the elevators. As the doors opened, I found myself face to face with Corinne. She was holding a latte, looking relaxed and victorious. She glanced at the box in my arms and let out a short, sharp laugh. "Leaving already?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "I told Prescott you wouldn't last the 2 weeks. You don't have the stomach for a fight." I stepped into the elevator and turned to face her. "I'm not fighting, Corinne. I'm complying. You wanted to cut costs. I'm helping you by removing the most expensive item on your budget. Me." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. We'll have the Mumbai team up and running by Monday. By next month, no one will even remember your name." I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors began to slide shut, I looked her dead in the eye. Make sure you check the Northeast Distribution Hub, Corinne. The temperature sensors are prone to drift in the summer. Without the autocorrection, you might want to hire someone who knows how to read raw data logs. I don't need your advice, she snapped. Just go. The doors sealed shut, cutting off her sneer. As the elevator descended, I felt the physical weight of the building lifting off my shoulders. I walked through the lobby, handed my badge to the confused security guard, and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The silence in my head was deafening. For the first time in nearly a decade, I wasn't worrying about a label, a timestamp, or a federal regulation. I got into my car, tossed the box onto the passenger seat, and drove. The drive home was surreal. I kept waiting for my phone to ring. I kept waiting for the compliance alert tone that had dictated my sleep schedule for years. But the phone sat silent in the cup holder. When I got home, I placed the black drive in my personal safe, made a cup of tea, and sat in my garden. I watched a bumblebee navigate the petals of a rose bush. It was efficient, purposeful. It knew exactly what it was doing. Unlike Vanguard Pharma, which was currently a headless chicken running around a barnyard, even if they didn't know it yet, 3 days passed. I spent them sleeping, reading, and ignoring the sudden urge to check my email. I knew the chaos wouldn't be immediate. The legacy system I had left them with was functional, technically. It would allow them to ship products, but it wouldn't catch the mistakes. It wouldn't flag the incompatibilities. It wouldn't stop a tired warehouse worker from scanning a pallet of expired antibiotics and putting them on a truck. The poison would seep into the system slowly, invisibly, until it was too late to pump the stomach. On the afternoon of the 4th day, my phone finally rang. I looked at the screen, expecting to see a frantic call from HR or legal. But the number was unfamiliar. I let it ring twice before answering. "This is Marin," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Marin," a deep, calm voice answered. "This is Magnus. I believe you know who I am." I froze. Everyone in the industry knew Magnus. He was the CEO of NextGen Bio, Vanguard's largest and most aggressive competitor. While Vanguard was known for cutting corners, NextGen was known for precision. They were the gold standard. "I do," I replied. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I heard a rumor," Magnus said. "I heard that Prescott was foolish enough to let his best goalkeeper walk off the field." "I'm sitting at the bistro on 4th and Main. I have a table, a bottle of sparkling water, and a contract. I'd like you to join me." He didn't ask if I was free. He knew I was free. I arrived 30 minutes later. Magnus was sitting in a corner booth, looking nothing like Prescott. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking around the room for someone more important to talk to. He was reading a paperback book, looking relaxed. When he saw me, he stood up and offered a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please, sit." There was no small talk. "No, tell me about your weaknesses." Magnus pushed a folder across the table. "I've been trying to buy Vanguard for 2 years," he admitted, his voice low. "Not for their products, our R&D is years ahead of theirs. I wanted to buy them for their operational efficiency. Their recall rate was statistically impossible. My analysts couldn't figure out how they were doing it with such outdated infrastructure. But then I did some digging, and I realized it wasn't the infrastructure, it was you." He opened the folder. "I don't want to buy Vanguard anymore. It's a sinking ship, especially now. I want to hire the captain who kept it afloat." I looked at the contract. The numbers were staggering. A base salary double what I was making, stock options, and a specific clause regarding proprietary technology licensing. "You want the Sentinel," I said, looking up at him. "I want you," he corrected. "And I want the tools you build. I know Prescott claimed ownership of your work. I also know about the waiver. My legal team is very thorough. If you come to NextGen, we will license the software from you. You retain ownership, we pay for the usage, and you build us a department that makes Vanguard look like a lemonade stand." It was everything I had ever asked for. Respect, compensation, autonomy. Just as the tip of the pen touched the paper, my phone buzzed in my purse. Then again. Then a continuous vibration. I frowned and pulled it out. The screen was lit up with a text message from Silas. "System failure. Cardiac shipment blocked. Corinne is here. She's screaming. She's trying to override." I stared at the message. I could almost hear the noise of the warehouse through the text, the beeping of forklifts, the shouting, the panic. The legacy system must have finally hit a data mismatch it couldn't resolve. In the past, the Sentinel would have silently fixed the code and allowed the shipment to proceed. Now, the manual system had thrown up a wall. I looked at Magnus. "It's starting," I said softly. "Vanguard?" he asked. I nodded. I signed the contract with a flourish and slid it back to him. "I'm yours, Magnus. But I suspect my former employer is about to have a very bad afternoon." I was right. The following Monday, I reported to NextGen's headquarters. The difference was night and day. The technology was cutting edge. The culture was collaborative. I spent the first week integrating the Sentinel into NextGen's server architecture, upgrading the code to version 2. It was exhilarating work, but while I was building the future, Vanguard was drowning in the past. My phone became a hotline for the disaster unfolding across town. Silas called me late Tuesday night. He sounded exhausted, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Marin, you have to tell me what to do," he whispered. "It's total bedlam here. The new compliance team in Mumbai, they don't answer the phone. They communicate via email with a 24-hour delay. We have trucks lined up at the dock, waiting for clearance paperwork that isn't coming. Stick to the manual protocol, Silas," I told him. "Do not release anything without a signature." "That's the problem," he hissed. "Corinne is down here right now. We have a massive shipment of temperature-sensitive heart medication, the alpha blockers. The legacy system is flagging a temperature variance in the containers. It says, data mismatch. I told Corinne we need to physically inspect the pallets. That takes 6 hours. She says we don't have 6 hours. She says the client will cancel the contract if we miss the delivery window." I gripped the phone tighter. "Silas, listen to me. If the temperature variance is real, those drugs are ineffective. If you ship them and a patient takes them, they could go into cardiac arrest. Do not sign that release." "I refused," Silas said, his voice trembling. "But she's overriding me. She's using her executive override code to bypass the safety check. She says it's a glitch caused by your old system leaving. She's forcing the shipment out." "Document it," I commanded. "Silas, get off the floor. Go to your office. Print the log showing her login. Print the error code. Save the security footage of her at the terminal. Send a copy to your personal email. Right now." "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, I'm doing it." I hung up, my stomach churning. Corinne wasn't just incompetent, she was dangerous. She had just gambled the company's existence to meet a quarterly quota. 2 days later, the gamble failed. I was sitting in my new office at NextGen, overlooking the atrium, when my personal cell phone rang. I glanced at the ID. Prescott. Mobile. I let it ring. I took a sip of my coffee. It rang again immediately. I waited until the 4th ring before sliding my thumb across the screen. "This is Marin," I said. "Give me the password." Prescott's voice barked. There was no greeting, no pleasantries. He sounded breathless, high-pitched, stripping away all the veneer of the cool, collected CEO. "Excuse me? Don't play games with me, Marin," he shouted. "We have a crisis. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has flagged a $5 million shipment at the port. They say the digital manifest doesn't match the physical cargo count. The pills are counting as unidentified substance because the codes are wrong. They've impounded the trucks. The Sentinel isn't auto-correcting the manifest." "Of course it isn't," I said, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "Because the Sentinel isn't there, Prescott. I need the administrator password to reactivate it," he screamed. "The IT team says the drive is missing." "Where did you hide it?" "I didn't hide it," I replied, my voice calm and sharp. "I removed it. You gave me a specific directive, Prescott. You told me to leave, and you told me to hand over company assets. I did exactly that. I left the company hardware on the desk. But the Sentinel? That was on my personal drive, as per the instructions. You sabotaged us," he sputtered. "You stole company property. I will sue you. I will drag you into court and bury you in legal fees until you're homeless." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said. "Do you have your legal counsel in the room with you?" "What?" "No, I'm calling you to fix this. Get your legal counsel, I advised, and ask them to pull the file marked Intellectual Property Waivers, 2021. You'll find a document there, signed by your predecessor, explicitly stating that Vanguard Pharma has no ownership claim over any software tools I developed on personal equipment. It also states that the company declines to pay for a license. It is an ironclad document, Prescott. My new employer's legal team, who are excellent by the way, have already reviewed it. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. I could hear him breathing, short, panicked gasps. You work for NextGen? He whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I do, I said. And Prescott? Regarding that shipment at customs. If the manifest is wrong, that's a federal offense. But if the temperature logs on those alpha blockers are also wrong, that's criminal negligence. I suggest you stop threatening me and start calling a criminal defense attorney. I ended the call. I placed the phone down on my desk. My hands were not shaking. I felt a profound sense of closure. Prescott had wanted a war. He had wanted to crush me to save a few percentage points on a budget sheet. He had no idea that he had just fired the only person who knew how to keep the wolves at bay. And now, the wolves were inside the house. The silence that followed my final phone call with Prescott was not the silence of peace, it was the breathless quiet before a detonation. I knew that by refusing to unlock the system, I hadn't just ended a conversation, I had escalated a corporate dispute into a federal incident. Prescott, driven by an ego that refused to acknowledge reality, did not call a criminal defense attorney as I had suggested. Instead, he doubled down on the delusion that he could intimidate his way out of a catastrophe. He believed that if he hit hard enough legally, NextGen Bio would retreat, or I would crumble and hand over the keys to the kingdom he had discarded. 3 days after the shipment was impounded at the port, a process server arrived at the NextGen headquarters. He handed me a thick, manila envelope containing a lawsuit filed by Vanguard Pharma. The accusations were predictable yet vicious: corporate sabotage, theft of proprietary trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty. They were throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick long enough to force a settlement. Magnus read the lawsuit in his office with a calm, detached expression. He turned the pages slowly, looking like a man reading a mildly interesting weather report rather than a declaration of war. He asked me if I was prepared for the scrutiny of a deposition, warning me that Vanguard's legal team would try to paint me as a vindictive ex-employee who had planted a digital bomb on her way out. I am not afraid of their questions, I told him, my voice steady, because the answer to every single one of them is in their own filing cabinets. We did not countersue immediately. Magnus understood the power of restraint. We simply filed a motion to dismiss based on documentary evidence and scheduled the deposition. The deposition took place 2 weeks later in a sterile, windowless conference room at a neutral law firm downtown. The air smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. Prescott was there, sitting next to his lead counsel, a man with a sharp suit and eyes that scanned the room for weakness. Prescott looked diminished. The arrogant shine that usually coated him like armor was cracking. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were restless, constantly adjusting his tie or tapping the mahogany table. Corinne was there as well, ostensibly as a witness. She sat with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, refusing to meet my gaze, radiating a mixture of defiance and sheer terror. Vanguard's lawyer began aggressively. He paced the room, accusing me of digital vandalism and risking patient safety for personal leverage. I let him finish his opening tirade without interrupting. When it was my turn to speak, I answered every question with monosyllabic precision. Did I remove the drive? Yes. Did I have permission? Yes. Was the software critical to operations? Yes. Then came the trap. The lawyer slammed his hand on the table for theatrical effect. So you admit, on the record, to removing critical infrastructure that belonged to Vanguard Pharma, knowing it would cause financial harm? I looked at my own lawyer, a quiet woman named Elena from NextGen's counsel. She nodded slightly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the fireproof envelope I had retrieved from my office on my last day. I slid a single, pristine document across the table to Elena, who then pushed it toward Vanguard's counsel. "I admit to removing my personal property," I said, my voice low enough that they had to lean in to hear me. "That is an intellectual property waiver, signed and dated 4 years ago by the previous CEO. Paragraph 3. Subsection B explicitly states, the company acknowledges that the automated validation tool known as the Sentinel is the sole intellectual property of the employee. Vanguard Pharma declines to purchase a license for this tool and holds no claim to its code or function." I watched the lawyer pick up the paper. I watched his eyes scan the paragraph, then widen imperceptibly. He froze. He looked at the signature, then at the date, then at Prescott. "Did you know about this?" the lawyer whispered. Prescott stared at the document, his face draining of color until it matched the gray of his suit. I didn't look at the old files," he stammered. "I thought she was bluffing about ownership." "You sued a former employee for taking her own property," the lawyer hissed, closing his eyes for a brief moment of professional agony. "And you put it on the public record. Do you realize you've just admitted in a court filing that you knew the manual system was inadequate?" The deposition ended 10 minutes later, but the damage was irreversible. By filing the lawsuit, Prescott had not only exposed his own incompetence, he had invited the regulators into his living room. While Prescott was fighting a losing battle in a conference room, the real catastrophe was unfolding on the warehouse floor. Silas, my former manager who had been terminated by Corinne for insubordination, had not gone quietly. He had walked out with a digital archive of every email, every text message, and every screen capture showing Corinne overriding safety protocols. He met with an investigator from the FDA 2 days after his firing. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it because he was a man of conscience who couldn't sleep, knowing that compromised heart medication might be sitting on a pharmacy shelf. He handed over the smoking gun and email from Corinne, explicitly directing staff to ignore the temperature flags and ship the product immediately to meet the quarterly target. The raid happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in my new office at NextGen, reviewing the code for the updated version of my software when the news broke. It wasn't a routine audit, it was a full federal enforcement action. Agents from the FDA, accompanied by federal marshals, entered the Vanguard headquarters. They sealed the exits. They seized the servers. They moved with the swift, terrifying efficiency of a government that had been lied to for too long. I watched the footage on the news in the break room. There was a shot of the loading dock, where agents were placing bright orange embargoed tape over thousands of boxes of product. Then, the camera cut to the front entrance. I saw Corinne being escorted out. She wasn't in handcuffs yet, but she was flanked by agents carrying boxes of shredded documents she had tried to destroy in a panic, an act that converted a civil violation into a federal felony for obstruction of justice. The collapse was vertical. When the news of the raid hit the wire, Vanguard's stock price didn't just dip. It evaporated. Within 48 hours, the company lost 70% of its market value. Major hospital networks canceled their contracts immediately. The board of directors held an emergency meeting to oust the leadership team, but you cannot fire a captain after the ship has already hit the bottom of the ocean. That Friday night, my phone rang at 2 a.m. I was awake. The adrenaline of the week, keeping sleep at bay. I looked at the screen. Prescott. I hesitated, wondering if I should even answer. But a part of me knew this was the final act, and I needed to witness the curtain call. "Hello, Prescott," I said into the darkness. "Marin," his voice was slurred, heavy with exhaustion. "They're going to indict me. The legal counsel says I could be facing prison time for criminal negligence. They're saying I should have known what Corinne was doing." "You were the CEO," I replied softly. "Ignorance is not a defense at your pay grade." "I can fix this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I can still fix this. Listen to me. I have money, personal money. I can pay you 5 times what NextGen is giving you. Just come back. Bring the system back. Tell the feds it was a glitch. Tell them the data is retrievable. Help me reconstruct the audit trails." He was asking me to manufacture evidence. He was asking me to join him in the cell he was building for himself. "You still don't understand," I said, feeling a profound sense of distance. "You think this is about a software bug. You think this is about a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation, he shouted, a flash of his old arrogance breaking through the desperation. Don't act like you're a saint. Everyone has a price. My price was a 10% raise, I said, my voice ice cold. My price was respect for the work that kept you safe. You laughed at that price, and now the cost has gone up to something you cannot afford. Please, he whispered. I don't want to go to prison. I don't retrofit broken ethics, Prescott, I said. I build futures, and you are not part of the future anymore. I hung up the phone and turned it off. The silence that followed was absolute. The end of Vanguard Pharma came 3 months later. The fines levied by the government exceeded the total liquid assets of the corporation. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation. There would be no restructuring. The assets were put up for auction. Magnus and the board at NextGen Bio moved quickly. We didn't want their brand. The name Vanguard was now synonymous with failure. But we wanted their infrastructure. We acquired the warehouses, the distribution fleet, and the patent portfolio for pennies on the dollar. It was a ruthless acquisition, executed with the same cold logic I applied to my code. 6 months after I had walked out of the building with my box of belongings, I walked back in. The sign on the glass doors no longer said Vanguard Pharma. Workmen were scraping the letters off, replacing them with the sleek blue logo of NextGen Bio. I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking on the same marble floor. I took the elevator to the 40th floor. The executive suite was in disarray. Movers were hauling out the expensive Italian furniture. I walked toward the main conference room. The door was open. Prescott was there. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing jeans and a wrinkled polo shirt. He was packing a small cardboard box. He looked older, smaller. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just a man who had lost everything. He looked up as I entered. For a moment, his eyes flashed with recognition, perhaps even a spark of anger, but it was quickly extinguished by shame. He picked up his box and walked toward the door. I didn't move out of his way. I stood in the center of the room, forcing him to walk around me. As he passed, he paused for a fraction of a second, but kept walking. I turned and watched him disappear down the hallway, a ghost fading into history. I pressed the intercom button on the conference table. Send in the transition team, please. A few minutes later, the room filled with people. Among them was Silas, whom I had rehired as the director of logistics. He placed a new binder on the table. It wasn't black, it was NextGen Blue. The warehouse is ready, Marin, Silas said, smiling. The Sentinel-2 is fully integrated. We're ready to start shipping. Good, I said. Let's get to work. A year later, I stood on a stage in a ballroom filled with 2,000 industry professionals. It was the annual Pharmaceutical Safety Summit. The lights were bright, blindingly white. Behind me, a giant screen displayed the interface of the Sentinel, which had become the industry standard, licensed to 30 different firms. I spotted Magnus in the front row, nodding. Next to him was Silas. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice amplified, clear and steady. For a long time, many of us in this room have been viewed as the Department of No. We are the invisible friction. I paused, letting the words land, but recent events have taught us a valuable lesson. Efficiency without safety is not business, it is gambling. And while you can gamble with money, you cannot gamble with trust. I looked directly into the camera at the back of the room. I was once told that my work was invisible, that I was easily replaceable. But here is the truth about invisible things. Gravity is invisible. Oxygen is invisible. The foundation of a building is invisible. You don't see them, and you certainly don't thank them. I leaned closer to the microphone, until they are gone. And the world comes crashing down. I stepped back from the podium as the applause rose, a thunderous wave of sound. It wasn't the sound of revenge, it was the sound of recognition. I had walked away from a place that didn't value me, not to destroy it, but to prove that I was the one holding up the sky all along. And now, standing in the light, I knew I would never be invisible again. Marin's story is a powerful reminder that silence is not weakness. Often, it is the most devastating form of strategy. She didn't need to burn the bridge to prove a point. She simply stopped holding it up and let gravity do the rest. If you have ever quietly packed a box and walked away from a place that refused to see your value, know that you are not alone. Your absence can speak louder than any argument ever could. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs the courage to finally know their own worth.